Hi, welcome to Class 18 of Developmental Psychology for Psych 250 for the summer 2017 semester at North Dakota State University. Today we're talking about peer aggression and friendship, or actually friendship and peer aggression if we wanted to put it in the appropriate order. Excuse me. Just some housekeeping as we get started. Um, You are, for the next 2 days, there will be no lecture posted. You'll need to be watching Mean Girls. You can either watch all of it in one sitting, or you can do it in two 50-minute. It can be done in two 50 minutes chunks. There is a worksheet that you need to download, and those are your discussion questions. So make sure that you do those. Um, the reason I'm having you watch Mean Girls is we're talking about bullying today, and I want you to look at watch Mean Girls because it's a really good picture of what bullying looks like. So I want you to think about that. What we're talking about while you're watching the movie on your own, and then the questions will help you to contextualize some of what you're watching into what we've talked about in class. Now, you have a quiz that is going to be on Blackboard on Friday at 12, I think. I'll double check. It'll be 12. I'll make sure that it's set to 12. Actually, I can look right now and tell you with certainty that it is 12 o'clock. Um, nope, it's not. Let me fix it. I'd say this because when I was doing the test review last week, or 2 weeks ago, or however many weeks ago it was, I thought that I had done the quiz and I hadn't done the quiz until somebody reminded me. Okay, yes, it will be on the 14th at 12 o'clock. The quiz will be released to you. So that's due Monday, the 29th. And that covers material we talked about on week 4 and week 5. So class on July 6th and July 7th, and then class this week. And Mean Girls is on the quiz, so you want to make sure that you take the quiz before you or watch the film before you take the quiz. Today's class should be also short, like yesterday's class. You're welcome. Because there's just not a lot of material to cover. When I was dividing the lectures out, I think I thought there was going to be more to talk about than there ended up being. So that's fine. Short week, not a big deal. Next week, as a reminder, we're going to start the adult series in class. So just be prepared to shift gears from adolescence to adulthood. All right, let's start our conversation about friendships and peer aggression. As we move into adolescence, our relationships with our peers become very important, and this is because we see a shift from parental influence to peer influence, and a lot of this has to do with the amount of time and the amount of autonomy that we have. So in childhood, we are pretty much under the control of our parents at all times because we don't have the mobility, we don't have the understanding, we don't have this social freedom to be as autonomous as we like. And so we really go where our parents want us to go. We're friends with the people who are in those places. And our parents have a lot of influence over us. And that's the way it should be because our parents are wiser than us and they help us to understand things in a way, in more abstract ways when we ourselves cannot do that. But when we see this shift into abstract cognitive thinking, when we see this shift into more social independence, more physical mobility, it's natural then for the shift to go from parental influence to peer influence. And this is why our ability to function as adults, as social adults, will hinge upon our ability to interact with people of our similar age. Now, we also need to interact with our adults as well. So there's nothing wrong with having adult influences or having adult friends as a teenager, as long as those relationships are appropriate. But the majority of the people that we're around and the social context in which we will live as adults is going to be defined by our peer group. So it's very important that that influence shift happens. And for this reason, peer relationships are the most important during this developmental stage, unlike any other. They play a huge role in your social development, in your psychological development, and the physical development in a way, because the activities you engage in that could affect your physical development, a lot of times will be informed by your friendships. And it's very important during adolescence for teenagers to spend time with other teenagers. It's incredibly important. Um, if you don't, you're not going to have the social skills requisite to really um, do well as an adult. Um, but that being said, and the latter half of this class will talk about this, negative peer relationships can have a devastating effect on social development and psychological health. So if you have bad friendships or bad relationships with people of the same age or bad interactions even with people of the same age, they don't even have to be your peers. You could actually have negative psychosocial development. And so it's important that the quality of friendships is very good. Now, what role do friends play in our lives in adolescence? Well, friends defined are peers with whom we have a close emotional bond. So, friendship involves intimacy, which is psychological closeness, that's aided by an adolescent's increased self-disclosure. So, during this period, adolescents become much more likely to talk about what's going on in their lives, talk about their beliefs, their wants, their hopes, their desires, and this self disclosure makes people more intimate because we become closer to them in our minds. Friendships also play an important role because there is within this definition of friendship a mutual understanding of the other person's values, beliefs, and feelings. Now, friends don't have to share values, they don't have to share beliefs, they don't have to share feelings, but they just understand this is how they feel, this is important to them, and I accept that about them. There's also mutual affirmation and support. Your friends are the people you go to oftentimes when you're upset because you need them to affirm what you're going through and to support you, even if they don't agree. There's also a high value placed on loyalty during adolescence in terms of our friends. We expect that our friends are not going to tell our secrets to other people, that they're going to stand by us in a fight, that they're going to support us no matter what. And also in adolescence, we see that friends typically have similar identities. So LGBT people a lot of times gravitate to each other. People of color tend to gravitate to each other. White people tend to gravitate toward each other. Um, People who identify as highly intelligent or enjoy academics tend to gravitate towards each other. We tend to find people who are very similar to us. Also, SES, people who are a similar social class to us. People who have similar aspirations or desires or goals as we do. And then people who have similar beliefs also. We tend to gravitate towards those people. We naturally sort of self classify ourselves into different identity groups. And there's nothing wrong with that. As long as we're not excluding people and we're not saying that our group is better than the other, people naturally do that, and that's fine. We best find the support and understanding that we need and the intimacy that we need with people who are like us. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. As long as we're not excluding people, that's no problem. And that's not to say that friend groups can't be diverse. There are plenty of friend groups that are incredibly diverse, but it's not always the case. And there's nothing wrong if that's not how it is. As long as you're open to other people and as long as you are not excluding, that's not a big deal. And one of the cool things about this is you can have there is diversity, inherent diversity in this and in this and in this, not necessarily in this, but definitely in these. So you will. So that's why you see diversity in groups. Another thing that's really important but doesn't happen very often in adolescence is cross gender friendships, and these are friendships with people who are of a different gender identity than yourself. And so um, boys and girls, cisgender people, transgender people, non binary people, and pretty much anyone. Um, these are important because they help us to better understand other people of a different gender identity. Um, but in early and middle childhood, children unfortunately are often segregated. We separate people by boys and girls, and what that does, unfortunately, is it conditions us to thinking that there are differences between us boys and girls. It also sends the message that you have to be one or the other, which is incredibly distressing to people who are non binary or non conforming. The segregation that we see is called sex cleavage, cleavage being the space in between to push apart, to cleave. Um, Meat cleaver is a big knife used to cut large chunks of meat. So we separate people by sex or by gender. Now, we see in adolescence, though, especially as we get into late adolescence, more interaction between boys and girls, and between boys and girls and non-binary people as well. Um, and so we start to see more cross-gender friendships, which really help to create a more sophisticated social interaction and social experience. This also happens to coincide with the development of sexual orientation and attraction. So maybe it's not that surprising. Like maybe it is normal, in fact, that we start to take interest in these people that have been hitherto for separated from us because now we're like, oh, we're interested in girls. I'm gonna hang out with these girls. I may not like them physically, but if I hang out with them, I might get to learn more about girls. I'm interested in them, or vice versa. Within the peer group, so a peer group are people who are the same age as yourself, or in the same context as yourself. So when you become an adult, your peer group is not so much defined by the people that are your age, but the people who do similar things to you that you do, or in similar identity groups as you. But when you're a child and an adolescent, your peers are your friends, or not your friends, people your age, and your friends usually come from your peer group. So you've got the peer group and then your friends. Okay, peer and friend are not synonymous terms. It is incredibly important, though, regardless of whether or not all of your peers are your friends, it's important for adolescents to get a sense of belonging from their peers, to feel like they fit in with their peer group. Um, and we do this in many different ways. The first is through social comparison. And this starts in middle childhood. We talked about this. Like all of everything that we're talking about today really is applicable to middle childhood as well, um, and also early adulthood. Um, but children in middle childhood and adolescence participate in what's called social comparison, the evaluation of opinions, abilities, and physical changes against someone of similar social standing. And this happens a lot, especially with the physical changes in puberty. We're talking about, well, did this happen to you yet? Did that happen to you yet? Like, trying to figure out where you are in terms of your greater peer group, and it can be distressing when you're not as far along, or if you're too far along compared to comparison to your um, peer group. We also have what's called a reference group, and these are people that we compare ourselves to. So we can really subdivide our reference groups into three different categories. The first are people who are downward reference groups. So these are people who we consider ourselves to be better than those people. So we'll compare ourselves to them in everything that we do. Well, do I look as good as that person? Did I do as good on the test as that person? Am I as smart as that person? And if we are, then that increases our self-esteem. It also dehumanizes that person, but that's another story for another day. We have an upward reference group, and those are people that we look up to, that we strive to be like. And so we compare ourselves. Well, do I look as good as that person? If you do, oh wow, I feel really good about myself. If you don't look as good as them that day, oh, I just feel even worse about myself. So your upward comparison group can actually, I mean, I guess your downward can too if you're not doing as well as them, right? But you're looking up. You're trying to, you're striving to be like that person. And then we have our sort of same as reference group. I don't really know what the term for that would be. But that's just a group that we compare ourselves to. These are people who are like us, and we just kind of see, okay, do they do better than me? Or do they do worse than me? Do they look better than me? Do they look worse than me? And it's sort of an average comparison. You're trying to figure out how well you're doing that day. We, our peer group is separated into different kinds of um, two different major categories. The first are cliques. And we all know what a clique is, probably. These are people, groups of about two, minimum of 2 to 12 people, which form your social circle. So you could say a clique is your friend group, right? These are the people with whom you have similar interests, similar aspirations, similar beliefs that you consider to be your close friend, your core group of people. That is a clique. And people talk about it. I was just instinctively didn't agree with this, and until I became a developmental psychologist, and then it became like academically disagree with this, but people talk about how being clicky is bad or cliques are bad. They're misusing the word clique. Cliques are normal. Being in a clique is normal and healthy. It's your social group. It's just the people that you click with, that you work well with. Um, what people really mean to say is that that's a very exclusionary group of people. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not reasonable to expect more than 12 people to hang out with each other. You can't have a meaningful relationship with more than 12 people. Honestly, groups of more than about 6 or 8 just don't work. You want to keep your group pretty small. Um, so, like, I remember, especially in my youth group growing up, they would talk about how clicky it was, and I'm like, but we like our cliques. Like we don't like the other people. It's not that we hate them. We just don't want to spend time with them in the same intimate way. Like there's nothing there's nothing wrong with that. Um, Now our cliques can be classified into a larger or a larger um, category called a crowd. A crowd is a larger group that has similarities but which may not interact with each other. So, thinking about the youth group example, the youth group itself was a crowd. It has a similarity. We're all there for the same reason. Most of us have similar interests, similar social groups, etc., but we may not interact with each other. But the cliques kind of fall within that larger crowd. Okay, so does that make sense? You've got your crowd, your clique. So peer group, crowd, clique. Now, we can categorize the people in our peer group in one of 4 ways. One is popular. Popular teens tend to be ones that are generally well liked by everyone and have good social standing, high social standing. The second type are controversial, and you either to be ahead in society in your social circle as a peer, you want to either be popular or controversial. Controversial students or peers are people who have fairly good social standing. They're they're well liked by a lot of people, but they're also disliked by a lot of people. So people notice them and they either like them or they don't. I'm a controversial person. Always have been. Um, in terms of the larger peer group now in my crowd and in my clique, I'm popular. So you can be classified based on where you are as well. Um, Controversial peers, though, the point to make is that they're largely liked and largely disliked. Now, you don't want to be on the 3 or the 4, so the rejected and the neglected classifications. Rejected people are peers who have just been completely rejected by the peer group. They're like most people dislike them, most people ignore them, most people don't care about them. Neglected, this is even more tragic. These are people that nobody even notices. They like literally there's there's ambivalence. Nobody cares about them at all. Like there's no hateful feelings or dislike feelings or love like feelings or any other feelings for them. It's just like they're neglected. They're completely alone. Like nobody even thinks about them at all. Now, adolescents, unlike any other group of people, are very attuned, very well attuned to which categories each person falls into. They get the social stratification system and they adhere to it because they're always engaging in social comparison and referencing. And so they have to know where people fall. Now, the type of person that you can be categorized as, or the type of peer you can be categorized in, does have bearing on how you will develop as a person. In terms of psychosocial outcomes, popular and controversial tend to have more close friends, tend to be more adjusted, and generally more connected. They have higher status. Um, on the other hand, rejected and neglected children and teenagers are lower status and they tend to have few close friends, feel less well adjusted, or are less well adjusted, and are generally lonelier. So, so you want, like I said, you want to be up here in the higher statuses. Obviously, being popular is that's where you want to be, but if you're controversial, you're still doing well. What happens when you've been rejected by your peers? Well, this peer victimization can happen to everyone, but it mostly happens to these people who fall within these lower statuses. Um, Adolescents are very conscious of social structures. They're always engaging in comparison. They're engaging in gender intensification, and there's this pressure, and there's a pressure and a push from peers to conform to what is normal or what is popular. Normal, I should say. Um, And this happens in one of two ways. First is peer pressure, and this is an influencing of peers to conform. This is when you're trying to convince them to do it, and you're not really hurting them. You're just nudging them in the direction you want them to go. The other side of this is bullying. And this is a systematic, recurring, and targeted social punishment for someone who does not conform. So bullying happens when when peer pressure doesn't work. And a lot of times we even skip peer pressure and go straight to bullying, especially with rejected um, people. They're just seen as they don't conform to what we want them to be, so we're going to push them and make fun of them and put them down. And it's important to note several things about bullying because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what bullying is. Bullying is systematic. It means it happens recurringly. It happens in a very procedural way. You can identify it using a checklist. There's a system to it, and it's not just happening one time. It's happening many times in many different contexts. It's recurring, and it's targeted, meaning it is done intentionally. Somebody has intentionally made a decision to victimize someone else. That is bullying. Now, what bullying is not, it is not somebody saying something ugly to you or something mean to you one time, or maybe even two times, or saying something or doing something on accident that hurts you or hurts your feelings. That is not bullying because it's not systematic and it's not recurring and it's not targeted. It's just mean. Meanness is aggression. It's just pure aggression. It's not bullying. And the reason it's important to make this distinction between just pure meanness and bullying is when we compare meanness and bullying and we put them in the same category, it minimizes the experience of someone who's been victimized day after day after day. If somebody picks on sadness every day for a year, that is going to have much more profound impact on her emotional and psychological well-being than if someone says something mean to her one time, right? So we want to make sure that there is a clear distinction between bullying and between just straight up meanness. Now, bullying can take one of two forms. The first is overt victimization, and this is physical stuff like hitting, kicking, physical violence, pushing, shoving, um, overt outward, right? The other type is relational, and this is a more psychological victimization or inward. This is social violence, such as spreading rumors, seeking to destroy social standing or reputation or influence. This is These are mean words. In other words, mean words directed at a person. So I can call someone a whore. You're a fugly slut. That's the reference to the movie you're gonna watch. That would be relational victimization, even though it's not spreading a rumor. It doesn't have a lot of impact. It's still relational because I'm trying to hurt this person through words. So relational is words and actions, social actions. Overt is physical, um, where you're making bodily contact or even threatening. I would consider a threat. I'm gonna kick you to be overt because you're threatening physical violence. When it comes to peer victimization, every single member of the peer group has a role. That's why it's a system. You remember we talked about family systems theory, the system being that every single person contributes to it. Peer victimization is also a system. Like I said, systematic. So every member of the peer group plays a role. The first, I'm going to use my figurines again because I love them, and I'm gonna get another one. I'm gonna get this dude right here. Okay. So the victim is is or victims is the first role, and that is the person who is the target of this systematic recurring violence. So I'm gonna say this guy's our victim because he's super happy and like wears ratty clothes and nobody and he has a flower on and he's pink, so he's obviously gonna be a target, right? Um, Unfortunately, statistically speaking, he's probably gonna be targeted. So okay, so okay, there we go. So this is our victim. Okay, the bully is the aggressor who picks on a socially or physically weaker victim. So like a shrimpy little person like this could pick on a bigger person like this if he has more social standing, right? So we're going to make anger our bully. He's the aggressor and he is hitting on hitting, not hitting on the victim, okay? The assistant is a person who aids the bully. So we're going to say that the stain is the assistant. And um, she is laughing, or not laughing, she is calling him names and saying, you brought this on yourself. You deserve to be picked on, okay? So she is the assistant. She is actively helping. Now we're going to make Joy, poor Joy, our reinforcer. So the reinforcer is also assisting the bully, but they're not actively engaging with this person. They're just laughing or they're cheering it on like, "Hey, I like what you're doing. He's a freak." Like they're not physically and or relationally attacking this person, but they're giving support. And this really is the person that that the bully is trying to impress. Bullies have great self-esteem. They just want to increase their self-esteem by having other people think that they're powerful because they're picking on this weaker person. So this is our reinforcer. Now, the majority of people are going to be this guy. This is our bystander. A bystander is a person who is present, so he's there, who is um, who's present but is not reinforcing, so not cheering on, and is not assisting the bully, or nor are they helping the victim. They're just standing there watching it. Okay, and see. The bully likes them too, because the bully wants to feel stronger and more powerful. They already feel good about themselves. They already feel strong and powerful. They know that they are. They want to be reinforced in that. And so they like this person who's actively reinforcing it and this person who is too afraid of them to do anything. Okay? Our last person, our sadness doll. See, sadness is redeemed in my little scenario. Sadness is the defender. And this is who we want to be, because this person is the person who puts a stop to bullying once and for all. A defender is a peer who comes to the aid of the victim. They either say, stop being mean, or they help this person escape, or they go and get the teacher. They do something to actively stop the situation. So that's the defender. Does that make sense? I feel like Mr. Rogers. I always feel like Mr. Rogers when I'm doing like little figurines. I love it. I'm gonna start doing this more often. Okay. Now, what outcomes can we expect from peer victimization? Well, peer victimization over a long period of time. So we're talking months and months and months to years to semesters. No, weeks to months to semesters to years. Does that make sense? Can have many negative psychosocial outcomes. So the longer it occurs, the worse off you're going to be. People who experience peer victimizations for long periods of time experience high levels of depression and anxiety. Um, they're at much higher, I don't know, increased risk for suicide ideation. So it it is a huge risk factor for suicide. Increased risk for academic problems and dropping out. And we talked about this, and we talked about trans people, and we talked about gender identity in middle childhood or in early childhood. That transgender students are 5 times more likely to drop out of school because of being bullied. And because they're more likely to be bullied, they're 5 times more likely to drop out. It also increases the risk for social isolation. So people who are picked on a lot tend to just remove themselves from society as a whole. They have trust issues, and it can lead to social skill deficits. So you don't interact well with people of your age. It's really sad. Peer victimization is an awful thing that happens far too often. It doesn't happen. It's like not like 50% of the time, say, but that it happens at all is just too much. So, how do we stop this? What do we do to make this problem go away? Our defender is so important in this role. Defenders play a very important role in ending peer victimization. Standing up directly to the bully, the assistants, and the reinforcers helps so much. Providing direct social support to the victim also helps. Even if you're not, so like helping them to escape, or even like after it's over, comforting them, um, that is still defending because you're telling this person, this victim, what happened to you is not okay. And I stand with you. I support you. Because remember, if you're being victimized, you have this feeling of social isolation. You have social skill deficits. You withdraw from your friend group, which then leads to you feeling depressed and anxious, feeling suicidal, having academic problems and dropping out. So if you can feel not alone, if this person can make you feel not alone, then that is a huge way to fix the problem. And then alerting authority figures. No zero tolerance programs do not work. But getting the teacher involved is still important because the teacher can reinforce that it's not okay in the classroom, and a lot of times that gives other people like fear who may have wanted to be a defender but just didn't know if like he would get in trouble or if it was going to turn out bad for him. That gives him confidence to be a defender next time. What we know is that peer defending is the only effective long-term bullying prevention that works. Zero tolerance programs do not work. Teacher led programs do not work. Parent led programs do not work. Laws do not work. What works is friends sticking up for each other. Because bullying is a social experience. It is an experience that happens within a peer group. And because it happens within a peer group, it must be dealt with by the peer group. The other really wonderful thing is that peer defending is contagious. If one person stands up, other bystanders also will feel comfortable standing up. Because if they feel more powerful than the person who's attacking the victim, then they're not going to stand by and do nothing. People don't do anything when they don't feel like they're able to, or they don't feel like they have the competency to deal with it, the social standing to deal with it, or they feel like they themselves are at risk. But if multiple people do it together, then you feel much more strength in numbers. All right, your discussion for today. I want you to talk about a time that you felt like you didn't belong. Okay, it doesn't have to be a time you were bullied. Just within the context of your peer group, what was a time that you felt like you didn't belong within your peer group? And what would you like a friend or another peer to do to help you out? Okay, so I want you to think about that. Write it on the discussion board for class 18 for week 5. And I look forward to reading your answers. All right. Now, our next 2 classes, there will not be a lecture posted. Like I said, you're watching Mean Girls. The link will be posted tomorrow at 11. There's a YouTube video you can watch. I think it's the whole film. You can also watch it on Netflix, which would be my preferred mode for you to watch it because you'll know for certain it's the whole thing. And if you need to pause it, you can always come right back to it without a problem. Um, Also, I want you to think about while you're watching the film, what would you do if you witnessed peer victimization in your residence hall, in the union, or in a locker room, for example? Now, there is a worksheet for you to complete, and it does include 2 additional supplemental readings. Very short, they're just news articles, so you don't have to worry about it, but you do need to read them in order to answer the questions. Remember that your quiz and discussion board are due Monday at 11:59 p.m. All right. Have a good weekend. Enjoy Mean Girls. Let me know if I can do anything for you. Darcy.corbetthall, CORBITTHALL, at ndsu.edu. Have a good day. Bye.